Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our event, A Rule of Law in the Western Balkans and the New Enlargement Methodology. I'm glad to see you all here interested in this important topic for the future of the European Union. I would like to extend a special welcome to Mr. Giulio Venneri, head of the Centre of Thematic Expertise for Rule of Law, Fundamental Rights and Democracy in the Directorate General for Neighborhood Policy and Enlargement Negotiations. Special thanks to the event moderator, Elisa van Engeloven, Senior Researcher Politics Area of Mondo Internazionale Geo. I would like to spend a few words to introduce Mondo Internazionale and the theme of our event. Mondo Internazionale operates in the field of cultural diplomacy with the focus on youth empowerment, promoting and carry out international cooperation activities of intercultural, multicultural, interdisciplinary, and intergenerational nature. With a digital-driven approach, Mondo Internazionale favors the development of a multicultural dialogue between young talents from all over the world within a structured and innovative reality. Digital connection and support the universities, institutions, and the companies on national and international level play a pivotal role for development of global synergies. Thus, it is important to deal with today's issue in a context of dialogue and knowledge with the Balkan countries. We know the criteria envisaged by the European Union for enlargement and the new methodology, but they certainly require a case-by-case assessment. If I'm not mistaken with data, North Macedonia, the European Commission in 2009 recommended the European Council to start negotiations. After Montenegro, negotiations started in 2012, and negotiation with Serbia started in 2014. In the same year, Albania received the candidate status. The questions are what is the future for the Balkan areas, the Balkan countries, and what is the future for Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example, or Kosovo? And with these questions, I would like to thank you very much for paying attention and give the floor to Giulio Venneri for a brief introduction, and who will moderate the event this evening. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Michele, and the team from Mondo Internazionale for the invitation. It's a pleasure to have this exchange, and I hope we can have some refreshing thoughts and perspectives being shared with your team and with the audience, and I'm sure that I will gather some important feedback at the end of the day. I think that these kind of events are always of mutual benefits. We can, of course, share information and views from the practitioner perspectives, but it's also important for us practitioners to engage with scholars, young researchers, with the civil society. So I can just commend very much your initiative, and as I told you already back then, I was delighted to take part. The topic of today, as we agreed, is the rule of law challenges in the Western Balkans, and also linked to that the efforts that the Commission has put in place to streamline and, I would say, refine also the enlargement methodology, particularly last year with the adoption of a communication that has introduced a number of novelties when it comes to the method of engagement for accession negotiation. So in the context of today's exchange, I would be pleased to touch upon these aspects. What are the novelties of the methodology? What is the expected impact of the methodology in terms of easing the efforts of the countries concerned, but also in making the process more credible, more stable, more predictable, and also with a stronger political steer. These are, among others, the real objectives that underpin the adoption of this new methodology. A really short introduction on my side, since you mentioned amongst other concepts the question, what is the future of the Western Balkans? What is behind the corner for enlargement countries? Well, I can give you very short clarification in that regard. On the side of the Commission, I think the vision is very clear. I think we can state clearly that we have no doubts, in the sense that the enlargement negotiations is the way to go when it comes to the Western Balkans. So the famous Thessaloniki 2003 promise that was made back then at the summit of leaders of the EU and the countries of the region still stands very clearly. The future of these countries lies within the European Union. And this was also reiterated by President von der Leyen in very clear terms in their last State of the Union address. She picked on the narrative of the Thessaloniki 2003 promise to really stress and emphasize that we believe that the Western Balkans are already part of Europe, and therefore, as we said in 2003, the future of the countries in the region lies in the EU. As you know, the new Commission has the stated ambition of being a geopolitical commission. This was clearly put up front when the new executive was formed. And it was made clear in that context, in the context of that ambition, that we need to start from the neighborhood, and in particular the Western Balkan region and the enlargement remain undoubtedly a strategic objective. Allow me to quote the previous commissioner for enlargement, Commissioner Anna, with whom I worked in the past, who said a couple of years ago that we have a clear historic responsibility when it comes to pursuing the engagement with the Western Balkan countries and paving the way for accession negotiation. He made this comment in particular when he was sharing disappointment for the failure back then of the Council to agree on the opening of accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia a couple of years ago. But I think the expression that he used, this idea of casting light on this historic responsibility, is a very powerful message and is still very relevant. So I also wanted to pick on it. So I'm happy to share with the guidance of Elisa and her moderation some thoughts around these aspects, perhaps also some geopolitical considerations. Allow me to say, still for the sake of introduction, that it is clear we as European Union are not such a fancy partner to some extent for third countries, because I think we have a quite unique ambition, which is to engage and with third countries and foster rule of law, fundamental rights in a consistent, serious, effective way. And for some countries, the temptation of, so to speak, doing business with partners different than the EU, which sometimes just try to penetrate strategically an environment through economic means with, so to speak, no strings attached, no conditionality, no push for reforms, and so on and so forth. And most often, third countries also, some of them being semi-authoritarian regimes, not only do not promote the rule of law in their cooperation, but also try to do business in the dirtiest possible way. So trying also to circumvent environmental regulation and principle standards related to work protection, let alone public procurement, and so on and so forth. So we are, the European Union we have this burden which we placed on ourselves. I think that the reform of the Lisbon Treaty has been quite emblematic in this regard, because we have stated, we have constitutionalized with Article 8 the ambition of developing, as we said, special relations with all our neighbors, which have to be based on peaceful relation, of course, cooperation, but with the idea of still promoting the values upon the Union is founded. And then, of course, with the enlargement countries, the issue is even more relevant, because, as the treaty says, we are seeking for prospective members that are not only ready to respect the values of the Union, as Article 49 says, but also promote the values of the Union. So we are not an easy partner to deal with, if you allow me to make a sort of a joke. In a sense, the European Union has the constitutionally stated objective of becoming the beacon of the rule of law, fundamental rights and democracy. I am speaking on an expression that I believe President Wilson used in the aftermath of World War I, when he was saying that the US should be the beacon of democracy across the globe. Well, I think we went, in terms of being a beacon of something, the EU went really 2.0, because we constitutionalized this ambition, and we link it to all the values that are common to the member states, that are at the basis of the EU construction. So it's quite of an ambition that we have. On that note, and apologies for the legal reference to the treaty, but as you know, we have we like always to go back to the founding documents. On that note, I give the floor to Elisa, and I stand ready to make more comments on the various issues at stake. Thank you very much again for the invitation. Looking forward to our exchange.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you all for coming. I sincerely appreciate your participation, Mr. Giulio Venneri, and for me, it's an honor to moderate this event. And also, I would like to thank you for participating and for your time and availability. So, as you said, Western Balkans enlargement process represents a fundamental asset for the European Union, in particular for its stability in the neighborhood. So could you explain to us, firstly, why is the Western Balkans so important for the European Union?
Well, as I said before, it's clear that the Western Balkans is Europe. And history and the trajectory of historical and diplomatic development show clearly that keeping the Western Balkans still outside the EU integration process is like having a missing piece, a missing brick in the wall that we are trying to, in the construction that we are trying to build. So, of course, there is an historic element, and there is also an element going back to more recent history. So there is also an element of historic responsibility when with the war that followed the end of Yugoslavia. It was clear that for the EU, which was back then having the first embryonic approach to foreign policy and something that could be some coordination in the field of foreign policy that then led to the common foreign security policy some years later. For the EU, the issue of the breakout of Yugoslavia was a lost bet. Probably those who study history of EU integration or international relations remember the famous words of I believe a minister of foreign affairs of Luxembourg who said the time of Europe has come. Back then, it was 1991, Yugoslavia was falling apart, and there was the ambition to freeze the crisis and solve the crisis with the European approach. We all know that the time of Europe did not come back then, And this costed years of war, including of civil war in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, very dramatic situations related to refugees and casualties, and we are still facing issues related to reconciliation, issues related to demining, and all that the war has left behind, physical and non-physical scars. So it's clear that we have an historic responsibility also vis-à-vis the recent past to work with our Western Balkan partners to push for reforms, and most importantly to ease and push for reforms that bring tangible and concrete benefits first and foremost to the citizens of the countries of the region that clearly are coming out from systems that in some cases are still unstable. I'm talking about new state structures, or as in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, we all know the uncertainty linked to the ambition of overcoming or not some of part of the design linked to the constitution of the country as it was envisaged in the peace treaty in Dayton, and so on and so forth. So we need to work first and foremost for the citizens of these countries, and we need, as again my previous commissioner used to say, it is costly, of course, to try to export stability, but it's an investment that is worth making, because the cost of exporting stability through engagement, presence, cooperation are for sure much lower of the prospective costs of importing instability if we leave the area on its own destiny. So I think on that powerful concept, I'll give you back the floor and answer your question. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your answer. About stability and about the importance of citizens' well-being. So one of the major issues when it concerns Western Balkans is the implementation. One of the main difficult when it concerns Western Balkans, it concerns the rule of law and its implementation. So rule of law, as you already said, is one of the most fundamental principles of the European Union. And as the OECD declare, is the foundation of democratic systems. So what are the specific measures that the Union has implemented to strengthen the rule of law in the Western Balkans countries?
Well, let me start by making a reference of what are the problems that we think possibly are the most recurrent in the countries concerned. And I would like to make a short reference to one of our last regular assessment. As you know, we publish regularly this enlargement package and country reports where we assess, among others, the state of the rule of law in the countries concerned. And overall, we noted once more in the last enlargement package adopted in October last year that the progress that we could note on the rule of law across the region remains quite uneven. And in some cases, there has been a complete lack of progress of reforms. So with differences from one country to the other, we can say that in general, there are several weaknesses that persist when it comes to the capacity of the national, so to speak, rule of law chain to work effectively and to guarantee a consistent fight against organized crime, and also progress towards the eradication of corruption at all levels, because corruption in some cases is really across the region remains quite widespread, as we said in our report, both across the public and the private sphere. So it is a scourge that is affecting negatively the life of the citizens from the region, and goes without saying, also organized criminal network exploit such a widespread corruption to do much easier their business and to come up with new ideas to circumvent legislation and do their dirty business. So we have quite of a challenge in terms of objectives, to work on eradicating corruption, to work on empowering the rule of law chain, as I said, in the countries concerned, to fight more effectively organized criminal network. And this passes, of course, through two main areas of intervention. One, of course, is the all home affairs sectors, where the European Union has been very vocal in terms of supporting the reforms of law enforcement agencies in the countries concerned. And then the other big pillar of intervention is, of course, the work on the judiciary. Because even with the best possible police and investigators, it is clear that if there is not good cooperation between prosecutors and police forces, if prosecutors are not up to the task in terms of designing solid indictments, and if judges are not impartial, there is no rule of the law. And we know that the alternative and the antithesis of the rule of the law is the rule of the money, is the rule of corruption. So it all goes back to the emphasis that I place on the fight against corruption. So these are the challenges, and these are the areas where we as a Commission, we have focused consistently in the past few years, and the bulk of the EU assistance and support that has been granted to the Western Balkan countries in terms of working for the entrenchment of the rule of law is focused on these two areas predominantly. We are covering much more, ranging from issues related to border management, strengthening the asylum system, strengthening also and working on the prison systems. Also, the execution of ruling is an important aspect, but the bulk of work when it comes to the rule of law lies on the key actors of what I like to call, I think I've already used the expression 2-3 times, you're familiar now, the rule of law chain. So this is the focus that we are maintaining. Back to you.
Thank you so much. That's extremely interesting. Also, another question, I was wondering, you talked before about the new methodology is one of our main theme today. And since France's October 2019 veto of accession talk for North Macedonia and Albania, this move from Macron's administration has been differently interpreted across Europe. On one side, it appears as a step backwards, and while on the other, as an opportunity to reform a process considered dysfunctional. As you said, this new methodology is trying to implement and to reinforce this the accession process in order also to in order to aim the candidates to join the European Union. And we were wondering what in particular were the proposed changes, and on the other hand, the characteristics that were maintained.
Thank you very much for this question focused on the methodology. Allow me to make a clarification and allow me to make a little step back to some 15 years ago. The methodology for the EU enlargement has been refined. This is really the term that I appreciate and I think is the most accurate and fair. It's been refined for years. This is something that started back in 2006, and the Commission has paid a lot of attention in terms of doing what? Doing some meaningful lessons learned. So the first attempt to refine the methodology dates back to 2006, because back then we were confronted with the issue of two new member states that were about to be granted the right to join the Union, Romania and Bulgaria, from the 1st of January of the following year. And that still presented some residual issues for which we established then a follow-up mechanism called cooperation and verification mechanism. And back then, based on the experience of the engagement with Romania and Bulgaria, the Commission proposed the so-called renewed consensus on enlargement, which, among others, was indeed focused on going beyond what I like to refer to as the tick in the box methodology, in terms of just checking the compliance with EU legislation and other legal measures in the countries aspiring to become members. So it was clear back then already, with the experience of Romania and Bulgaria in particular, that the work of rule of law is a quite demanding piece of work. And therefore, just measuring achievements in terms of alignment to the acquis communautaire was not the main way to go. And indeed, in the process of engaging with Croatia, there have been already substantial methodological, further methodological adjustments that were introduced. If you allow me to continue the historic analysis of the recent history of the methodology of enlargement, then we had a rather interesting and concrete and very meaningful engagement in the context of the visa liberalization dialogues between 2008 and 2010, in the context of which we had a clear test case. Visa liberalization was done against the backdrop of country-tailored roadmaps based on various pillars, most of it linked to the rule of law, but also partially on fundamental rights. And the work in that context was checked with a very structured, benchmarked exercise, and also with a more closer dialogue in terms of negotiations and engagement with the countries, with the governments of the countries concerned. And this was already for us an important test to put in motion the promise of going beyond the tick the box methodology and being really focused on gradual benchmark progress and, most importantly, concrete results. And if you go indeed in the to read the opinion on the membership application of Albania and Montenegro that was then prepared by the Commission right after the completion of the visa dialogue, you will see that the Commission, for the first time, makes also reference, when it comes to the rule of law in this document, to the importance of the track record of countries ensuring a track record related to the rule of law. So, as I said, every step in the chain of the rule of law is important. So, track record of proactive investigation, track record of indictments, confirmed indictments, and track record of final rulings related to organized crime and related to corruption at all levels, but particularly at high levels. So, with this focus on results, with this methodological emphasis on benchmarking, already we had in the past few years, building on the experience of Romania and Bulgaria, building on the experience of the engagement with Croatia, we already refined quite a lot the methodology of the enlargement. So if you allow me to draw the conclusion, I could say that the recent refining of the methodology of the enlargement that took place with the adoption of the communication last year is nothing but the culmination of a process which is rigorously based on clear lessons learned. So we are not reinventing the wheel, we are not improvising, we are not politically changing the cards on the table. I also read some commentaries before we adopted the methodologies, some commentaries where critics would say that, oh, the Commission is preparing a new methodology because it has to delay the process since there is no political consensus on moving forward for the enlargement. That is not true. It is clear that the politics and the intergovernmental dimension within the EU when it comes to the enlargement policy is complex at present. We have to take stock of it. The Commission is the executive, and then there is a whole political and diplomatic dimension that gives the political steer, and sometimes the political dimension works as a push, as it worked 15 years ago and also in the previous 2004 enlargement. Sometimes it works, as it did more recently, as a handbrake. But we are aware of that. But as far as we are concerned, the Commission produced a new methodology with the ambition, as I said at the beginning, to give, first of all, more credibility to the process and the progress within this process. promotes more political steer on both sides, on the side of the EU and on the side also of the countries concerned, which is indeed an ambition that is clearly linked to the recognition that the internal political diplomatic dynamics at this historical moment might be a bit tricky. But the most important part of the methodology, for which I can really say this is a culmination of a process that, with the evidence I brought, dates back to 2006 and beyond, has been to introduce a more dynamic approach, because we have also foreseen in the context of this revised methodology that the 35 negotiation chapters, which represent the main script for our engagement in the accession negotiations, are reorganized, are streamlined, so to speak, in the context of thematic clusters. So clusters allow a stronger focus on a given sector. So we can move forward the engagement in a more harmonic, cross-cutting way. And in the context of this revision, of course, there is a cluster linked to the fundamental, at the core of which lies the engagement for the rule of law. And then the last, so to speak, ambitions of this new methodology is also to strengthen predictability in the process, which is an important aspect, and also to guarantee that the EU can control better the engagement and with the countries concerned, especially when problems arise. So there is now on the table with the new methodology a very specific vision also on this aspect. So member states will have the right to decide that negotiation can be put on hold, even in certain areas, or fully suspended if there are issues, particularly with the fundamentals, with the rule of law, and also chapters that have been already closed can also be reopened if the issues that arise are really substantial. To this, there is also the provision for which there is a possibility to adjust both scope and intensity of EU funding and diminish funding if issues arise. Of course, with the exception, we put this up front, of the funding that are targeting the civil society and their direct support to the civil society. This will never be touched and affected by the possible poor performances of the governments. Will not punish the civil society because the government is not delivering. But still, there is a clear provision for which the scope, intensity of EU funding can be adjusted downwards if there are problems. And also, as a final possible handbrake, in case of issues and problems arising, decision can be taken to pause, suspend, or even withdraw the benefit of the so-called closer integration, which is a clear ambition that has been given and has been offered to candidate countries, and particularly with this new methodology, to countries that will negotiate, to be granted early access to EU programs, or also up to concession to join the free market earlier, and so on and so forth. So all these benefits could be granted even before accession, but should there be issue, the handbrake can be pulled. So in a nutshell, and sorry for being a bit long, but the communication is quite dense, the communication that we adopted in February last year with the new methodology. So I thought that it was useful to give you a fluid and comprehensive overview. Back to you, thanks.
Thank you so much. It was really clear. In fact, the history of enlargement process, it's wide. So it was important to have a focus on an historical focus. So you were talking about the credibility of enlargement perspectives. Lately, there has been an erosion of trust and a weakening belief in the integration process, in particular from the part of the citizens of Western Balkans, and not only in regards of the European Union, but also concerning their own institutions. This weakening of belief might seem as the European Union is losing its influence in the region, facilitating also the entrance of other international actors. As you said, the Western Balkans are extremely interesting from a geopolitical point of view. And some example may be the Russian Federation or China, whose presence in the Western Balkans is attracting the attention of the international community. In particular, concerning Russian Federation, what might be the perspective of a Russian growth of influence for the Balkans and also for their enlargement process? And could it represent an obstacle, or are the times of Russian power in the Balkans a thing of the past?
I think this is a very, very articulated question, because the question marks were not only the last one, but I think you opened with question marks and you closed with question marks. So you will excuse me if I swing left and right, but such a broad question is clear. I start from what you say about the interest of citizens in the EU project, in the countries concerned, from the Western Balkans, and in the degree of affection and belief that citizens may have vis-à-vis the EU. In some countries of the region where recently there were opinion polls been made, actually we did quite well. I think there is an emblematic case, which is that of Albania, where really, I think over 95–96% of the population is in favor of integrating the EU, and the European Union dream remains the most important ambition, even for the ordinary citizens. So it is really something that is reassuring and it's encouraging. It is true, of course, that in the past few years, there might have been, especially in some countries, a bit of disenchantment on the side of the population, probably due to the fact that citizens were hoping for the EU to inject already the seeds of revolutions. But unfortunately, the enlargement process remains and will be a merit-based process. This means two things. It means, first of all, that the Commission does not substitute itself to the governments of the countries concerned. The governments need to be mature, committed, and they need to deliver. So it is clear that this is the responsibility is shared in this way. We are assessing their progress, and the governments have to deliver. Whereas perhaps in the common general perspective, there was the idea that the stronger the engagement from the EU would be, and then the easier reform would flourish, and so on and so forth. Most of the reforms that have been pushed in the past few years in the EU reform agenda were complex reforms. Some of these also a bit unpopular, and therefore resistance in the domestic arena has been generated. So it is a delicate dynamic that is taking place, but it's a battle that is worth fighting. As I said at the beginning, of course, we are not a popular partner, because we promote change for the rule of law. We promote change for socio-economic stability. We promote environmental standards. We promote connectivity. And we promote welfare and social security for citizens. And all these reforms are costly. All these reforms in some system entail small revolutions. And there is, of course, in some cases inability, in some cases resistance, and so on and so forth. Whereas other countries, some of which semi-authoritarian regimes, have in theory a much easier way, because they try to conquer geopolitical space with their development cooperation, with their cultural cooperation, and they try to penetrate with their companies without much care for environmental standards, for protection of workers, and so on and so forth. So, as I said, the EU I think in this we are unique in the world. As I said before, we have the constitutionally stated ambition to become the beacon of democracy, rule of law, and fundamental rights on the planet. So we engage in a systematic way, and it is not by chance that these three dimensions that I just mentioned represent the very core of what we call the fundamentals. The fundamentals of the enlargement are rule of law, human rights, socio-economic stabilization, and overall the organization of the public administration. So these are the fundamentals of our engagement. It is true that other countries from the Gulf region, countries from the closer east, you mentioned Russia, you mentioned China, they have their agendas, they have their geopolitical projection, they have their economic interests, and they do business in a different way than ours. I think that we, as I said at the beginning, hold and bear this historic responsibility, this historic commitment. I'm proud that we have that. And I think that we have to pursue it because possibly prosperity, freedoms, and all the benefits that come through the EU integration process are something that are unique, and they can be and shall be given to the citizens of the countries that have a prospect of membership. And this will really grant, in the case of some weak and stable and young democracy in the region, the culmination of a process of state building and democratization, and this will be the best possible way also, as I said before, to complete the stabilization of what is the Europe's doorstep. So the geopolitical, to go back to your closing point, the geopolitical context and competition has become more complex, and it's intensified, of course, because the actors are more active than before. And if you look also beyond the Balkans and in the rest of the Mediterranean, when it comes to the management of crisis on the northern shore of Africa, it's also clear that the competition also there, it's quite complex and articulated, also beyond the enlargement. If we go the other countries of the southern neighborhood, and also Bosnia itself in the eastern neighborhood. So competition is high, competition is complex, competition is getting more aggressive as well. As I said, we are those who come with strings attached when it comes to our cooperation and engagement, but it is for a good cause. It is because our project has in mind equality of people, as in equality of citizens before the law, eradication of corruption, opportunities for all, freedoms, and so on and so forth. These are the strings that we attach to our engagement, and I think it's a noble thing to pursue. Back to you, Hans.
Of course, I completely agree with you, and also notwithstanding, of course, the a little lack of faith in the European Union, it's known that the faith in the European Union as a driver for prosperity is widely recognized by the citizens of the candidates countries and by their government. At the same time, the other political actor involved in the competition for the Western Balkans, as we said before, is China, which is becoming one of the most prominent actor in the Western Balkans due to its approach, which is to establish itself in key economic areas while gradually positioning as an indispensable actor and transforming its interaction in other fields such as culture or politics in long-term and institutionalized relations. So this China expansive approach is affecting the relations between European Union and Western Balkan countries. It comes to my mind, firstly, the Montenegro situation. Also, for what concern it happens lately when the Montenegro government suggest to the European Parliament Committee on Foreign Affairs that the European should embark on a rescue mission to refinance Montenegro's debt with the Export-Import Bank of China, which prompted several geopolitical arguments. On one hand, the necessity for Europeans to step in and to counter China's growing presence in the region, and to the other, over the necessity to reflect on a set of problems related to governance and accountability. So, should the European Union create a more rigorous long-term strategy on the nexus between the government's lack of accountability and the growth of China's influence in the region? Also, for example, by coordinating the political diplomatic dimension and of the member states, or also third actors, and the European Commission.
Once again, a very articulated set of thoughts. So I can subscribe to some of the concepts you've now made in your report. I'm not an expert on China, so I won't make comments on this. I can't make any comments, but I can comment on what you said. Your last point of reflection in terms of coordination within the European Union. I think, and this allows me to make also a general consideration on something that is going on a little bit in terms of public perception of what the EU is and what the EU can. Because the EU is often blamed for lack of action, but we don't have, I think there are two things related to this. When there is lack of action, we still can't deny that there has been a lot of positive action and stabilizing influence and achievements that have been consolidated in the past decades, and for all of this, the efforts were well worth. And this, I think, is a first important element. Second, when it comes to the criticism for lack of action in some areas, we forget that the European Union is a complex machinery, and there is, as I mentioned before, a political diplomatic dimension, the intergovernmental dimension, which ultimately brings about the accountability of the leaders and the governments and the ministers that sit around the table in the council and debate and try to find a consensus. In this, I like to make a comment. Multilateralism is not a guarantee of success. By definition, multilateralism is a method. But is a method with the ambition of inclusiveness, is a method that I think it's keep working and protective, in particular in the EU context. And as European Union, you have seen that in the new strategic political guidelines of the Commission, there was a clear reference to the commitment to pursue multilateralism, because we have seen in the past few years that many countries have, including some big world powers, have had the temptation to disengage from multilateral fora, to isolate, and to go on much more confrontational political dynamics in terms of bilateral relations with partners presenting conflicting geopolitical agendas. And this leads ultimately to instability. This leads to crises and wars that we are not able to address effectively as the international community in its complexity, and so on and so forth. So I think we do need to pursue, starting from the EU, the multilateral game. Of course, it's not granted, not to be taken for granted. We say, oh, the EU is not able to guarantee this. I mean, often we hear criticism to the EU also in areas where there is not exclusive competence of the Union. So everything is still, in terms of responsibility, attributed to member states, and that little of cooperation that absent is stemming based on the concession that member states do based on agreement in the Council. So we need to be very careful in terms of guaranteeing a fair assessment of what the EU can and manages to deliver. So no no specific comment on the geopolitical perspective of China projection in our neighborhood, but for sure a comment on your point on coordination. It's the more coordination we can do as EU, the more we can pursue in the best possible way what I called at the beginning as the constitutionally stated ambition of being a global actor that can push for its values to be promoted. And as I said, I think it's a battle worth fighting, because the values, if one reads the article that lists the values that are common to member states, let me see if I have it here, where Article 2 says of the treaty that the Union is founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, I'm quoting, the rule of law and respect for human rights, including the rights of persons belonging to minorities. And these values are common to member states in a society in which pluralism, non-discrimination, tolerance, justice, solidarity, and equality between women and men prevail. This is a magnificent ambition that we have to preserve these values. And as Article 49 says, Article 49 is not only a message to prospective members, it is also a reminder for current members. We need to promote and respect these values. So there is a dimension of facere and non-facere. There is also a proactive dimension here, promoting those values. The Lisbon Treaty introduced the concept of promoting. It was not there before. You can check previous version of the treaty. Article 49 was referring to the respect for values. So there was quite a passive vision vis-a-vis our values. Article 49 in Lisbon introduced the concept of respecting and promoting those values. So coordination is key, is essential. And I think against the backdrop of the values that I mentioned and the ambition of this common EU space based on justice, tolerance, and so on and so forth, we have the responsibility to maintain the EU intra-EU multilateralism well-oiled and functioning. Back to you.
Thank you so much. You've answered to all my questions. And we actually have a question from our Facebook Direct. Which is in the interest of legitimacy, how can the European Union be best justify to the European public the cost of integrating the Western Balkans?
I think I already gave an answer earlier, so you will forgive me if I make reference to what it is already been said. Disengagement is an option always, no? There could be a political decision to disengage and to lose the grip on the region and to let other actors increase their presence and to have countries to drift away from Euro law, from stability, stable society, and so on and so forth. This means providing a ground for criminal organization, particularly transnational criminal organization, groups linked to terrorism. We saw also in the recent crisis that when it comes to the phenomenon of foreign terrorist fighters, that there was quite some interesting movements also from the Balkans and other than from the United States, of course, and so on and so forth. So it is, of course, an option. For us, as we say, the Commission has been very clear. We maintain that the vision and the promise of the Thessaloniki Protocol remains. It is, I think, a clear interest of the Union to have a stable neighborhood, because if there is instability off the shore of Albania, which is some 80 kilometers from the region of Puglia, and we saw it in the 90s, it's like having instability at home. So the prospective cost of instability from the region, as I said before, will be surely 1,000 times higher than the current cost of our development cooperation and support to these countries. We have a clear commitment and we have a clear interest for EU citizens. So there is also a dimension of interest in view of protection and security and stability of the EU and its citizens. So it's something, cooperation in the Balkans and promotion of reforms, including through our technical assistance and EU financial assistance, is done for the citizens of the countries concerned, but also for the EU citizens. So this cost, the cost of our cooperation, are always a great investment in the future also of EU citizens. Thanks, Bertie.
Thank you so much for the specifics. I think we are done with the questions. I was asking if Michele wants to add something, or if you want to conclude with another thought that you would like to share with us.
Yeah, I would like to thank Giulio Venneri and you for this important event, and Giulio for your knowledge and that you share with us. And I'm looking forward to meeting guys in person again, maybe in Brussels or all around Europe very soon. And I hope very much this. And I strongly believe such themes are fundamental for the future of European Union and for the future for Balkans area. And so I sincerely thank Giulio Venneri and you, Elisa, again, and I wish everyone a pleasant evening, and I hope see you soon, very, very soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye to everybody. Thanks again, Michele, for the invite. It's been a pleasure, as you said, to hopefully see each other in person at the first possible occasion. And same concern for Elisa. Thank you, Elisa, for the moderation, for the interesting, very articulated question that were very engaging. So I appreciate your views and also your questions. Thanks to all those who followed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the participation. It has been a pleasure to asking you those articulated questions. Thank you very much, and good evening to everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.